Welcome to this online lesson on London in the Second World War. Things that go boom in the night, weapons of the Luftwaffe. This lesson will concentrate on all the weapons that were used on London in the Second World War. The aims are to identify the various risks from World War II bombs, secondly to compare the damage done by World War II bombs, and thirdly to evaluate the psychological and physical danger from World War II bombs, because not all bombs were alike. Here's a starter task. This picture shows the comparative size of typical German bombs from early in World War II compared to a standard sized British soldier. Your question: what do you think would cause more damage? 10 of the SC50 bombs, 2 of the SC250 bombs, one of the 500 kilogram SC500 bombs, or 500 of the 1 kilogram incendiary bombs? Note they'd all be of the same weight. Give it some thought, and there is the little incendiary bomb down there, and then come up with your answer. Pause the video if you want to have a go at that. Okay, well, I'm not sure that you can answer that necessarily definitely, but it might be worth considering the damage done by 500 of the 1 kilogram incendiary bombs, assuming they succeeded in setting fire to a particular location. Sure, one SC500 bomb would do tremendous blast damage in one particular area, but 500 1 kilogram incendiary bombs could spread fire right across a very wide area. So it's not at all an easy question to answer, and it gives us a bit of a hint as to how the Germans actually loaded their bombers. First of all, let's have a look at the different types of bombs that were available to the Luftwaffe earlier in the war. These are the main types of bombs. German commanders loaded their bombers with combinations of various sized bombs of various types based upon the size of plane, type of target, etc. Firstly, HE or high explosive. There are some high explosive SC250 bombs being loaded into a Heinkel bomber. Explosives make up 50% of the bomb weight, with the rest of the bomb weight being made up of the casing. It causes a lot of blast damage, and the bomb case shatters into flying shrapnel, all round a very dangerous weapon. It can also have an impact fuse or a delayed action fuse, which can make them deliberately very dangerous for anyone going to defuse them. Next are the HC or high capacity mines. These are high explosive bombs with a more thin case, which means less shrapnel but more blast. These fell under a parachute, so they were silent. There was no warning that they were coming. Then we got the incendiary or fire bombs. Here's a picture of one. They're about the same length as a 30cm ruler. We can see in the photograph one exploding into a white phosphorus ball of sparks. These are very small, typically just a kilogram in weight, and one bomber can carry over 1,000 of them in cases. They burn very hot and they're very difficult to put out. Your tasks then: describe each bomb type, include the dangers that they presented. Note down at least one advantage and one disadvantage of each bomb type. And thirdly, why would HE and incendiary bombs be carried in combination? Pause the video now while you complete that task. Okay, hopefully the dangers and the advantages and disadvantages are fairly obvious. But why would high explosive and incendiary bombs be carried in combination? Well, it makes sense in order to provide different types of damage at the same time. Imagine this. The heavier, more streamlined high explosives bombs would hit the ground first. They would shatter windows and knock the slates off roofs. Once that had happened, the incendiary bombs could land inside the houses and more effectively set light to them. High explosive bombs would also disrupt the streets and make it more difficult for fire brigades to get in and put these incendiaries out. This is something that the Germans discovered and managed to use to great effect both against London in December 1940, but also more famously against Coventry in November of 1940, where the entire city centre was wiped out by a combination of incendiaries and high explosive bombs. The British also tried this tactic against German cities with even wider destruction. What we're going to do next is we're going to have a look at some videos that tell us a little bit more about how these bombs worked and how people reacted to them. Preparing for the worst. In the description, I've got a series of videos which you should watch in sequence in order to answer the following questions. Firstly, with video 1, describe in specific detail the damage done by the high explosive bombs. Then video 2, describe the damage done by the incendiary bomb. Thirdly, how realistic or accurate is video 2? It was produced in 1940 before the Blitz had actually occurred. Explain why it might be like that. Then watch video 3. In what ways is it more realistic than video 2? Why might video 3 be more realistic? As a hint, it was made in 1941, after the Blitz had happened. And lastly, what was the purpose of this poster on the right? Source 1 is a poster produced in Britain in 1941. Beat Firebomb Fritz. Fritz was a common and slightly derogatory nickname for the Germans, based upon a stereotypical German name. Britain shall not burn. Britain's fireguard is Britain's defence. Pause the video, watch the videos in the description, and then press play when you're ready to continue. Done? Well, hopefully from video 1 we've learnt about the blast damage knocking through windows, making buildings collapse, etc. From video 2 you will have noticed that the incendiary bomb burns very vigorously and sets fire to things within houses themselves. They can also punch through the slates and the roofs of houses, but not necessarily. How realistic is video 2? Well, the fact is, not very. It's been really played for laughs. If you look at it, the life seems to be continuing in that town, apart from the one family who has had one 1 kilogram incendiary bomb land on their roof. Except in the previous slide we looked at how thousands of these incendiaries were dropped at any one time. Video 3, however, is much more realistic. Well, why it might be like that is because video 2 was produced before the Blitz and would not be intending to cause people to panic. Video 3 was produced after the Blitz when people already knew what the effects were, so there was no point in lying to them. What about the purpose of this poster? It's supposed to improve people's morale, but also keep them watchful of the firebomb danger, and to give them the courage to put them out if they found them. Let's move on. This task is a bit of a numeracy task, but can be quite handy for learning how the German bombers were loaded and what sort of combinations of bombs were possible. However, if you're not interested in doing this, you could always skip on a few moments. The above aircraft is a typical bomber of the period, the Heinkel HE-111. Other bombers included the Dornier Do-17 and the Junkers Ju-88, but the Heinkel is probably the most famous. It has a maximum bomb load of 2,000 kilograms internally, or 4,000 kilograms externally, on bomb racks that were attached just beneath the fuselage. To the right are the bombs that it could carry, where it carried them, and how many could be carried in the 8 internal or 2 external bomb racks. Task. What is the heaviest bomb load that the bomber can carry? This is by weight in kilograms. Secondly, what is the heaviest bomb load that it can carry internally? Thirdly, what is the maximum incendiary bomb load? Fourthly, what is the heaviest bomb load that it can carry internally that includes at least 2 incendiary bomb racks? This, by the way, was quite a common bomb loadout. Fifthly, what is the greatest quantity of individual bombs that can be carried with at least 2 SC250s and no incendiaries? Sixthly, what is the only bomb type not yet used in an answer and how many could be carried? Have a go at those questions and then we'll have a look at the answers. So press pause on the video now. Right, if you just had a go at that, I've just fooled you into doing some algebra. Instead of having x, y and z as your variables, instead we've got these codes for bomb numbers. So if you've ever wondered what's the point of doing algebra, well, I've just given you an example. It can be applied to virtually anything. Let's have a look at the answers. The heaviest bomb load that a bomber can carry, of this type at least, is to carry 2 external SC2000 bombs for its complete total of 4,000 kilograms. The Heinkel 111 would struggle to take off with any bomb load greater than this. What's the heaviest combination of bombs the bomber can carry internally? Well, it has 8 internal bomb racks, so therefore 8 SC250 250 kilogram bombs for a total of 2,000 kilograms. What is the maximum incendiary bomb load? Well, it could carry 8 incendiary racks for a total of 1,152 kilograms, which also translates to 1,152 individual incendiary bombs. What is the heaviest combination of bombs the bomber can carry internally, including at least 2 incendiary bomb racks? Well, that would be 2 SC500 high explosive bombs and 6 incendiary racks, for a total of 1,864 kilograms. Fifthly, what is the greatest quantity of individual bombs that can be carried with at least 2 SC250s and no incendiaries? Again, this was quite a common bomb load because it gave widespread blast destruction to SC250s and 28 SC50 bombs. That's for a total of 1,900 kilograms and 30 individual bombs. Imagine them being dropped one after another. It would provide destruction along a very long distance. Lastly, what is the only type not yet used in an answer and how many could be carried? Well, that is the parachute mine. 2 of them could be carried on the external racks for a total of 2,000 kilograms. So what might be the best bomb load for bombing a city like London? Explain why. Well, consider this question now that we've had a look at a lot of the bomb loads and I've mentioned some of the ones that were more popular. Press play when you're ready to give your answer. Well, in my view, the most practical bomb loads for bombing a city like London would be either the 2 SC500s and 6 incendiary racks, because this would provide a good balance between blast damage and incendiary damage, which would be difficult to put out. When I say good, I mean for the Germans and their intended effects, definitely not for the Londoners. Or the SC250s and the 28 SC50s. These bombs are fairly common, but they would provide blast damage over a very wide area. After all, they were trying to bomb London as a whole rather than just bombing specific areas of London. So the wider the damage area, the more effective from the point of view of the Germans themselves. It should be pointed out though that for all its strengths, the Heinkel was actually an ageing design by this point. It was never really designed for the bombing of cities, more for the support of ground forces, which meant that actually it wasn't truly suited to a job like bombing cities. Unlike British bombers like the Lancaster, which came later, which were ideally suited to this and were actually far more effective at it. Although that's very regrettable from the point of view of the civilian damage done. Technological terrors. As a result of the experience of the Blitz, Britain's defences improved. Night fighters with radar shot down bombers in the darkness. Improved searchlights and radar-assisted AA guns made targets more dangerous for bombers. And German commitments to other fronts, e.g. the Russian front from 1941, made losses to men and planes less manageable as they occurred over London and other cities. Meanwhile, from 1942, British bombing of German cities became incredibly heavy. Look at the number of incendiary bombs that Lancaster is unloading. All of this meant that Hitler looked to new technology to attack Britain. Your task then. Summarise how Britain's defences improved. Why would German civilians have put pressure on the Nazis to bomb London? And thirdly, as a challenge, why look to technology instead of building more planes and training more pilots? Pause the video now while you attempt that. Okay, hopefully we've identified that Britain's defences improved by the use of radar-equipped night fighters, radar-assisted guns and better searchlights. One thing about the radar-assisted night fighters though. One of the famous night fighter pilots of the era was a man called Cat's Eyes Cunningham. He was an ace who had shot down many German bombers at night with the use of air interception radar and of course a little bit of a help from his radar operator behind him. So how was this reported in the press? Well, people obviously wanted to know why Cat's Eyes was such an effective pilot. And it was argued that it was because he had exceptional eyesight. And how did he get such exceptional eyesight? Through eating carrots. Or at least that's what the newspapers said. And really that idea is stuck. We still say that if you eat carrots it helps you see in the dark to this day. Well, eating carrots is obviously very good for you. But the real reason behind it is that during the war carrots were in fairly regular supply and the government wanted to encourage people to eat readily available and healthy foods like carrots. I'm not saying that they don't help you in some ways, but they certainly aren't as effective as air interception radar. But the government wouldn't have wanted to give that secret away to the Germans in the newspapers, so that was a secret that was revealed later. Question 2. Why would German civilians have put pressure on the Nazis to bomb London? Well, really out of revenge. Seeing the devastation done to German cities, they would have wanted the same to happen to British cities too. But why did the Germans look to technology rather than simply building more planes and pilots? Well, they were beginning to run out of both. By 1943, the Germans were running out of raw materials, running out of fuel with which to power their fighters, and running out of men that they could train to fly their fighters. They were becoming more inexperienced and even younger than they had been before. And so by turning to technology, it was hoped that that would have overcome some of the shortcomings of manpower and resources that Nazi Germany was suffering by that point. We're going to look next at some of those technological terrors that the Germans produced. These are some of the last weapons to be dropped on London during the Second World War. they were known as the V weapons, the V1 pictured at the top and the V2 pictured below. Hitler's technological solutions were the V1 and V2 bombs. V in this case stood for Vergeltungswaffe, or revenge weapon. I hope my German pronunciation was alright there. These bombs carried heavy, high explosive warheads and could be incredibly difficult to stop. Arguably the V2 was in fact impossible to stop once it had been launched. Your tasks then. You're going to see some information screens on the V1 and V2 bombs. For each you will need to note down the name of the weapon, the type of bomb it was, the weight of the explosive warhead, the advantages of the weapon for the Germans, and the psychological impact or fear for the British. Lastly, how the British could defend against them, if at all. So that's 6 different categories. What I'd urge you to do now is to note down those different questions, leaving space for your answers underneath each one, also adding the subheading for the bombs. If you pause the video now, you can get down 2 copies of those different pictures and prepare for your notes on the next screens. So pause the video now, make your notes, and then press play when you're ready to see the information. Ready to move on? Let's have a look at the V1 first of all. The V1 flying bomb was also nicknamed the Doodlebug. This was the first of Hitler's revenge weapons. It was a small, jet-powered, pilotless aircraft with a 1-ton bomb in the nose. It was the world's first cruise missile. Once it had been launched, it would fly via autopilot towards London. They were launched at London and occasionally other targets from a fixed launch site in France. With an autopilot, it kept flying straight and level at over 400 miles an hour. And when the fuel ran out, which was calculated to be over London or its intended target, it would fall and explode. Not pinpoint accurate, but certainly accurate enough to hit a city like London. The engine made a distinctive sound that was terrifying, and if the engine cut out, there was no time to take cover. You just had to hope for the best. 9,000 were launched at Britain, so the threat was almost constant. The air raid warnings couldn't be given, otherwise there would never be an all clear. Although their speed made them hard to catch, things could be done. The fastest British fighters like the Tempest, the Spitfire, which is actually pictured tipping one over with its wing in the picture down below, or the Meteor, which was Britain's first operational jet fighter, could shoot them down or simply tip them over with a wing, which, believe it or not, was safer. After all, if you shoot at a bomb, it'll explode and possibly take you out with it. Anti-aircraft guns were also stationed along the routes of the V1s. Bombers also targeted the bomb launch sites, but later were small numbers of them were taken to launch from the air. A deeply unpleasant sound, but perhaps giving away why it was called a Doodlebug. Pause the video now, take any notes that you need, and then press play when you're ready to have a look at the V2. Let's have a look now at the V2 rocket. This is one of the world's first examples of a ballistic missile. This was far more advanced than the V1, and the first true ballistic missile capable of going into space. Indeed, the first living thing to ever go into space was a fruit fly sent aboard a V2, which was being tested by the Americans after the war. It was a large rocket with a 1,000 kilogram warhead. It could be launched from a mobile launcher, and so it was even easier to hide than the V1. The V2 flew up into the upper atmosphere and then came back down under the force of gravity onto London. It travelled at an incredible 3,580 miles per hour. This made it impossible to stop once it had been launched. There was no warning either. In fact, it exploded before it could even be heard coming, as it travelled faster than the speed of sound, and the sonic boom it gave off made a terrifying double bang that could be heard 10 miles away. there was no defence against the V2, except to try and destroy the factories that produced it and to find and hit the mobile missile sites. The British basically gave up trying to prevent V2 attacks and instead concentrated on winning the war as quickly as possible in order to stop them. That said, they had been very successful in delaying the V2 rockets as long as they could. They had been discovered being tested in the German city of Peenemünde, and that facility had been heavily bombed by British and American bombers with some success. It's likely that this delayed the V2 rocket program by over a year. Pause the video now and make any notes that you need to under your headings. It's incredible and slightly scary that the Germans were able to come up with such an advanced design during the 1940s. The chief designer of the V2 was a man called Wernher von Braun. He later designed the Saturn rockets that took man to the moon in the 1960s. The Americans were able to overlook his human rights abuses whilst working for the Nazis. After all, he was needed for the space race by that point. Yes, the morality of all this is rather complicated. What isn't complicated, though, is the damage done by these bombs. And what we're going to look at next is some examples of how the British reacted to this. Firstly, the reactions to V1 bomb damage. Read this source. This is from the diary of Frank Edwards, a factory worker in London, aged 36. On the 28th of June 1944, this was recorded for a mass observation document. Mass observation was the way that the government basically spied on the British people to see how they were getting on during the war. Today there had been a lot of low cloud, and it has been very dull nearly all day. In consequence, it has given the flying bomb a good chance, and we have been pestered by them all day since 8:30 this morning. Alerts have been going all day, so are the morning signals from our spotters at work. They have certainly had a time of it, and 8 times we have had to drop flat. They have been well over the district, northwest London where I work today, and whilst there have been no incidents, there have been some pretty big bangs fairly close, so they have made us jump a few times. Then have a look at this photograph. A policeman consoles a man after a V1 destroyed his home and killed his wife. Rescue workers in the background are digging to recover her body. July 1944. What makes this all the more tragic is that this is the V1 that didn't actually reach London. It had been shot down or otherwise nudged off target, and just by sheer bad luck, it had hit this poor man's house. It even appears ironically that he has an air raid shelter in the distant background. Your task then. Let's imagine your inquiry is this. What were the effects of the V1 attacks? Firstly, note down content, own knowledge and purpose for both sources. This would mean to give some information that you get from them, link this to your own knowledge of the V1s, and then suggest the purpose of these sources and why they were produced. Secondly, using the sources together in combination, what information do they give you about the effects of the V1 attacks? Thirdly, as a challenge, explain which source is most useful for understanding the effects of V1 attacks. Remember real, this means information that is relevant, information that is enough, an author that you can trust, and you've borne in mind any limitations to the source. While you complete this, press pause on the video now. Hopefully we've identified from source A in terms of the content that it was a constant nuisance to have to put up with the V1s, and they didn't really give you much of a let up. From source B we can see the devastation caused by a single V1. It is a very large bomb, and we can see just the psychological trauma that the poor man has suffered who's lost his wife. In terms of our own knowledge, we should know that there was no effective way of providing air raid warning for the V1s, which shows why the spotters had to work all day and why people couldn't just stop work. They simply had to take cover as best as they could while they worked. And equally, without that warning, that man and his wife were unable to take shelter. In terms of the purpose then, well, source A was the government's attempt to try and work out how Londoners were responding to the threat of the V1. That is why Mass Observation decided to interview people and work out how they were feeling about it. Source B is a little bit less clear. It could be just to record the damage of the V1, but also there could be a slight propaganda element to it here. It records the tragedy that this poor man has suffered. it also suggests to us that the Germans were bad people who would do this sort of thing to an innocent civilian, and it would strengthen Londoners' resolve to want to fight on to the end and complete the victory. Using the sources together, what information do they give us about the attacks of the V1s? Well, it gives us an indication of the psychological impact, both upon Frank Edwards and that man whose wife has been killed, but also the physical damage that the V1s caused. Lastly, which source is more useful for understanding the effects of V1 attacks? Well, I'll leave that up to you. They've certainly both got uses. For example, source A gives an idea of the impact on people's everyday lives, whereas source B gives us the idea of what happened if you became a victim of one. It is up to you to decide which effect is more useful to the historian who's investigating the effects of V1 attacks. We're going to consider the effect of the V2 next. There's Churchill. He had something to say about the V2, albeit rather late. So, we're going to look in a moment at a statement given by Churchill in Parliament. Which parts of the source suggest Churchill is playing down the threat of the V2? And why do you think Churchill waited over 2 months before admitting that the V2s were being launched at the UK? I might even try and read this using Winston Churchill's voice, which my students usually enjoy, or at least they've not been brave enough to say that they don't. From a statement by Winston Churchill in Parliament on November the 10th, 1944. In the last few days, the enemy has been using his new weapon, the long-range rocket, and a number have landed in widely scattered points in this country. No official statement about this attack has been issued. The reason for this silence was that any announcement might have been given useful information to the enemy. Last Wednesday, a number of highly coloured accounts of the attacks on this country was issued by the German High Command. The statements are a good reflection of what the German government would wish their people to believe. There is, however, no need to exaggerate the danger. The scale and effects of the attack have not hitherto been significant. Doubtless the enemy has hoped by his announcement to induce us to give him the information he has failed to gain otherwise. I am sure that this House, the press, and the public will refuse to oblige him in this respect. Take some time now to complete those tasks. Press pause on the video now. Well, why did Churchill give this statement to Parliament? For one thing, this is a public admission that the country is now under attack by a very new weapon, and one that is very dangerous. What parts of the source suggest that he is playing down the threat of the V2? Well, he's suggesting that the German reports are very much exaggerated, and he's suggesting that the scale of the effects has not actually been significant up to that point. So why did Churchill wait over 2 months before admitting that the UK was being attacked by V2s? Well, initially, the V2s were covered by the story that they were gas mains explosions, though anyone who lived nearby to them cannot have believed this. Instead, it is really a very kind of sneaky admission that the UK cannot do anything about the threat of the V2s. And so by admitting it as late as possible, Churchill is not providing any more panic than he needs to. November the 10th, 1944 is well after the September date of the first V2 attacks on London. Fortunately, with hindsight, we know that there were only a few months left of World War II up to this point, and it would become harder and harder for the V2s to hit London as the Germans got pushed further and further back into Europe. We'll finish up by doing quite a good revision activity. This could be a bit of a standalone lesson, in fact, because it should take you quite a while to do. London was bombed from September 1940 until the end of the war, but the really heavy bombing wasn't constant. That came in a series of campaigns. At other times, London might face hit-and-run raids of smaller scale. Task 1. Create a timeline from September 1940 to May 1945. That's 57 months in total. If we use a scale of 1 centimetres equals 1 month, then you should be able to fit it in. Note though that you will need to do several timelines to get them all in. Perhaps doing this on a large A3 piece of paper would be best, and do experiment first to make sure that you can fit all the timelines on before you start doing things in pen. Then you're going to start adding the following information onto them. Task 2. Key campaigns. Add blocks of colour to your timeline labelled with the following key bombing campaigns. Create a section from September 1940 to May 1941. This is the most famous era of the Blitz, and indeed the first. Then another section from May 1942. This is the Baedeker Blitz, which did not hit London. Instead, the Baedeker Guide was a German pre-war tourist guide. As a reprisal for the RAF bombing of Lübeck in Germany, which was a very historic city, the Germans deliberately bombed cities of historical significance. These included the historic cities of York, Bury St Edmunds, Bath, Canterbury and Exeter, among other places. Then we've got January to May 1944. This campaign was known as the Baby Blitz because it was smaller in scale to the original Blitz. Then June to September 1944 were the V1 flying bomb attacks. These did continue a little bit after that, but this was the period of greatest intensity of these attacks. Then, September 1944 to March 1945, these are the V2 rocket attacks. Pause the video now while you add these blocks of colour to your timelines, then press play when you're ready to add the next section. Task number 3 are key events, so these are specific days. Add labels to your timelines with the following events. You might want to add some detail from your own knowledge as to what happened. First, the 7th of September 1940, Black Saturday, the first day and night raids of the Blitz. 29th of December 1940, this was the Second Great Fire of London, the first of course being famously started in Pudding Lane in 1666, but this one is called the Second Great Fire of London because it destroyed a similar amount. The 11th of May 1941 was the last raid of the first Blitz. The 12th of June 1944 was the first V1 attack, just under a week after the D-Day invasion of Europe. The 8th of September 1944 was the first V2 attack. March 1945 were the final V1 attacks, which by this point were being launched from the air, and V2 attacks. Then by the 8th of May 1945 the war was over. Victory in Europe Day, or VE Day for short. Pause the video while you add these events to your timeline. Don't forget you can add extra detail to this timeline, or you can move on to task number 3. Follow-up tasks. Why didn't the Germans bomb London constantly? Think about the demands on their air force and what else they had to do. Secondly, RAF bombers bombed German cities too. Why was revenge an important reason why bombing of cities happened, both as a motivator for the British and for the Germans? Thirdly, later Germany relied on pilotless bombs, the V1s and V2s. Consider information that you've already studied. What reason or reasons might there be to help explain this? Once you've completed these tasks, that's the end of the lesson, and I'll say thanks very much for watching. I hope that you found that useful. If you did, please consider liking this video, and indeed subscribe to this channel for similar content. Thanks very much, and until next time, goodbye.